The Seahawks, unfortunately, are undefeated no more. An ugly defensive performance at Ford Field ends up undoing all the great things the Seahawks offense accomplished on Monday Night Football. We're going to be breaking it all down here on our weekly post-game show of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined here for our weekly post-game show by my co-host, Connor Benintendi. And a special thanks to all the 12s out there, especially those of you that are on the East Coast. It's after 1 a.m., and you're still listening in. What are your listens for 5 days a week here on the Locked On Seahawks podcast? Unfortunately, wish we had a victory post-game show, but for the first time this season, it's the other way around. The first loss of the Mike Macdonald era, a 42-29 defeat at the hands of the perfect Jared Goff and the Detroit Lions. Connor, this was one of those games where, it was odd. Late in the third quarter, I even tweeted this out. I thought after a 70-yard touchdown to Jameson Williams that this game was over. That's what I pronounced it, because it just felt like the Seahawks could not get any stops to save their lives on defense. The Lions were just doing whatever they wanted to do. And then you turn around and suddenly it's an 8-point game again. And it just kept feeling like the Seahawks could get so close, but they just could not find a way to get over the hump. And for that reason, they are going back to the Pacific Northwest with a 3-1 record, still a really good start to the season, but a game that disappointingly did not go their way with all the injuries they've got on defense and just some really poor execution, particularly on that side of the football.
Yeah, again, Corbin, I've been thinking about what I wanted to say about this game in general for about 2 hours now at this point, and it's tough to summarize in one small snippet here, but the one thing I will say is, first of all, Geno Smith is the best player that the Seattle Seahawks have. I don't think it's up for debate anymore. At this point, we have to be looking at a situation where Seattle extends this quarterback to be able to make him their signal caller for the next X amount of years, however many years that's going to be. At this point, I'm almost thinking, give this man a 5-year deal. At this point, I mean, this guy is the reason that Seattle was in this game. You can look at Ken Walker's 12 carries for 80 yards and 3 touchdowns and think, okay, that's the reason that Seattle was in this game. But if you actually watch the game, you see everything that Geno Smith did in order to orchestrate every single drive that Seattle had in order to be able to even stay relevant in this contest, evading pressure, being able to step up in the pocket, roll out of the pocket, whatever it might be, find the receiver downfield. He was incredible in this game. He set career highs in next to every single passing statistic that there is, completions, attempts, yards, everything that you can possibly look at. Geno Smith was just exceptional. I have no other word for it other than the fact that Geno Smith was exceptional. On the flip side of that, Corbin, the defense, no matter how you put it, outside of the starters being down 4 starters to begin the game, a 5th with Julian Love going down, you have almost half of the defense out of this game. We brought Mike Macdonald in for a reason. The Seattle Seahawks brought Mike Macdonald in for a reason, and that's for a performance not like this. This is, in my opinion, Corbin, unacceptable from a defensive perspective from the Seahawks standpoint, just in the fact that you allowed Jared Goff to complete 18 of 18 passes for 292 yards and 2 touchdowns. I mean, it's honestly, it's a laughable performance from this defense, regardless of what perspective you're looking at it from. And I don't want to just sit here and rail on the defense, but at the end of the day, you had so many opportunities to make a stop and you didn't. And the only time that you did towards the end of the game was with Tyrell Dodson, one of your starters, one of the guys who stepped up, made a play, and then the offense wasn't able to get it done. I think at the end of the day, Mike Macdonald has to do a better job of getting this defense, regardless of who's playing, ready to go. And it was unfortunate because at the end of the day, it's going to be something that we look back on a couple weeks from now, and I think probably laugh about a little bit, because I think this team is really, really good, Corbin. I think they're a really, really good football team. But tonight, it just didn't show. It didn't show, and they were able to fight back purely because of the offense, but the defense just played terrible. It played terrible.
And listen, this is where I stand on this, having watched the game here from the press box, and what an environment that it was at Ford Field. These Lions fans, they brought it. It was loud in this stadium. But the way that I'm looking at it, you can point the finger at Mike Macdonald all you want, but Mike Macdonald's not the one that's making coverage busts happen in the second half. He's not the one that's doing that. The guys were not executing. As Rayshon Jenkins said after the game, a lot of self-inflicted wounds, really poor tackling. Like, Mike Macdonald's not making that happen. You got to go out and do your job. It just didn't seem like, I don't know if it was because of all those starters that were out. And look, the players are not going to say that after the game. That it was, the general consensus from the guys. That had nothing to do with it. Our communication was just off. But when you're missing that many pieces, it just didn't seem like the energy was there at all. After the first drive, 3 and out, Jaron Reed gets a sack on third down. It's like, hey, Seahawks defense looks just fine. But that ended up being fool's gold, because the next couple drives, the Lions marched right down the field. They could run the ball whenever they wanted. Jared Goff could complete passes whenever he wanted. He never had a ball hit the turf tonight. As you said, 18 for 18. He averaged 33 yards per completion in the second half. He threw 6 passes and had 200 passing yards in the second half. You just can't do that. And I think the other thing that's really frustrating from an execution standpoint, the Detroit Lions had 13 first downs in the first half. You want to know how many of those they got off of third downs? Just 2. That means they were getting first downs on first and second down consistently. They weren't even getting to third down. The Seahawks couldn't even get them into a third down situation most of the time. That is the mark of a defense that is completely off. The secondary did not look good. The linebackers struggled. They had their issues, obviously, with all the injuries up front. I actually thought the edge guys that started, I thought the starters, Derek Hall and Draymond Jones, played really solid football. But when those guys subbed out, they were in trouble, and they had a lot of issues. It just felt like the well-oiled machine we saw the last couple of weeks, whether it's boiling down to the injuries or not. A lot of this really was execution. I don't even know that the game plan was a problem. It's just guys were not executing their assignments. And when you're playing a really darn good football team that is well coached, that has the strong culture the Detroit Lions have, they've got their home crowd. They're wearing their new black uniforms and their blue helmets. I mean, everybody's fired up. Calvin Johnson's getting inducted into their version of the Ring of Honor. Maybe the second best player in franchise history. I'm still giving Barry Sanders the crown as the best Lion ever. But nonetheless, the energy there, you cannot have those kind of self-inflicted wounds. Fumbling the ball like DK Metcalf did on a first down catch. Look, the effort was there. You're not going to fault a guy for the effort, but the fumble was huge. The Lions get gifted great field position. You can't make mistakes like that and expect to win games like this. But a lot of the mistakes were on the defensive side of the football throughout the night. And I felt a lot of it was execution more than not having a good game plan. And you could say that could boil down some to not having guys ready to play, but it definitely was an execution issue more than anything else.
No, I agree with you, Corbin. And that's the thing. And that's why I love, obviously, the yin and yang that we have on these post-game pods, because I think you do a really good job, obviously, of kind of boiling down into those nitty-gritty things. And I always try and take a big picture aspect. And the thing is you're right. It's not all Mike Macdonald. Obviously, there's only so much he can do with the personnel that is handed to him on any given night. And obviously, Seattle was extremely limited. And I'm not going to sit here and make excuses for the injuries that Seattle has or the penalties that they faced. I mean, the Tyler Lockett penalty there in the fourth quarter on the offensive pass interference, everybody's gonna have their excuses about, okay, well, that drive should have gone on and they should have gone and tied the game, whatever it might be, and everything else. But look, football is football. We're not going to sit here and talk about whether the refs made a right call or they made a bad call or everything else. At the end of the day, they made a call. Okay, Tyler Lockett initiated the contact. All right, whether it was a good call or not, he initiated the contact. You can see his arms up. It's something that the refs are going to call. That's football, okay? So we can't just sit here and sort of whine and complain about that. That's going to happen in every single NFL football game. At the end of the day, plays have to be made. And you alluded to it, Corbin. That fumble by DK Metcalf in the first half was, at the end of the day, really the biggest play of the game, even at the end of the game, whenever everything shaked out the way it did. Because if DK Metcalf doesn't fumble that football, Seattle probably goes down the field and maybe, potentially, ties the football game, and they're not in a 14-0 deficit early in the game. The offense doesn't have to do so much heavy lifting to get them back in the game with a decimated defense. There's so many things that could have happened in this game that just simply didn't happen. And I think that's the whole reason we're here, right, Corbin? That's the whole reason we're even talking about this game. That's the whole reason the Seahawks are even worth talking about, is because football happens in these ways, right? One small play can make such a massive change in the way that a 4-quarter game plays out. It does not come down to one bad play or one good play, or whether one ref makes a good call or a bad call. That's not the way that the NFL works. It's going to be a 4-quarter game, and whether or not you can come back or not come back from a small mistake or a big mistake, right? And that's what makes this so good. But at the end of the day, Seattle is and I want to reemphasize this because maybe I laid into him a little bit too hard in my opening statement there, Corbin. This is a good football team, and I am not worried about Seattle moving forward whatsoever. I think this is a very, very good football team. It's one of the best football teams we've seen Seattle field in quite a long time. The biggest thing is the defense does have to get healthy, because we've seen how bad this defense can be whenever they're relying on the backups. And at the end of the day, it's a big thing whenever you're relying on guys who have had very little preparation. It's not that Quinton Bohanna and Travis Gibson are bad football players. It's the fact that they are not starters in this defense during practice and everything else coming up through the week and throughout the season and everything else. You have to get these guys ready to be in starting roles quite quickly. And that can be difficult from a personnel perspective, to try to get these guys to fill these gaps that some of these other guys have filled through the first 3 weeks of the season. And it's just not easy. It's just not easy. This is a good football team. They're going to be fine. I think if you get through this week, which they have, and they proved to a lot of people, I think, in my opinion, Corbin, that they are a good football team. And if you get through this week, you go play the Giants on Sunday. If you get out of that game with a win, you're going into Thursday against the Niners with potentially a 4-1 record. No matter how you come out of that game, you're still looking pretty good overall. I'm not concerned about this team. I just would have liked to see a little bit more on the defensive side.
Yeah, I don't think that this is a game that is going to be, hit your panic button. The fact that they bounced back from the mistakes they made in the first half, they were down 14 at halftime and had several chances to tie this game up, and they just couldn't quite get over the hump with the injuries they had. The fact they were able to battle it out and stay within a score, I think the offense really showed what it's capable of in front of a national audience. They even had some mistakes that they could have fixed up. When we come back, it's game ball time. Even in losses, we got to give out game balls, at least on offense and defense. We'll get to that coming up next here on our post-game edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Bet on everything from next week, DK Metcalf scoring a touchdown against the Giants, or Jack Smith-Njigba being the first player on Sunday to get a 30-plus yard reception. Just throw in a $5 bet and you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to the post-game edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined by my co-host here. It is actually technically Tuesday morning if you are on the East Coast. If you're out of Seattle, it is still Monday. But we're breaking down the Seahawks and Lions Monday Night Football game. Unfortunately, all streaks have to end, and the Mike Macdonald era officially has a loss. Mike Macdonald no longer with an unblemished record as the Lions beat the Seahawks 42-29. It was 42-27, and there was a safety late that added 2 points for the Seahawks. A disappointing game, but you know what? This is the NFL. It is really hard to win games, and Detroit's got a very good football team. They were playing at home. There were injuries that the Seahawks and Lions were dealing with at the end. The Lions made more plays down the stretch. Let's get to our game balls. And listen, you and I, we try to pick different players when we talk about this. And I'll mention another player that may have been deserving. But as you kind of hinted at in the first segment, to me, this game, my biggest positive takeaway coming out of this game tonight, Geno Smith, what he was able to show in front of a national audience, throwing for a career-high 395 yards, 10 different receivers caught passes, so he wasn't just relying on DK Metcalf and Jack Smith and Jigba. He was getting everybody around him involved, and the way that he was doing it, I thought pass protection was solid. It was good, but there was still a lot of pressure, and Geno Smith was finding ways to maneuver the pocket. He has become one of the very best quarterbacks in the NFL when it comes to doing that. And there was one play in particular that actually made me gasp a little bit in the press box, and I think it was not alone. There were a few other reporters next to me when this play happened. Geno Smith was dead to right, and I think it was actually Aiden Hutchinson that was coming flying in, and Geno ended up bending over, spun out of the sack attempt, and then rolls out to his right, and then throws a dart over the middle between two defenders in a tight window to Jack Smith and Jigba for a first down conversion. It's plays like that that just make your jaw drop a little bit that we're seeing consistently. These are not fluky plays. Geno Smith is doing this consistently. So, yeah, he had an interception at the end of the game. That was a great play by the safety, Kirby Joseph. But look, aside from that, Geno Smith was the reason the Seahawks had a chance late to potentially tie this game. If Geno Smith's not out here, this game is an absolute blowout. He played one of the best games of his career and looks the part of a top 5 quarterback. That is not an exaggeration. He is playing at that level right now with pass protection that's not great and some other issues they've had to deal with on offense. He continues to find ways to orchestrate scoring drives and keep this team in football games.
Yeah, he came into this game, Corbin, with being top 10 in turnover-worthy plays per Pro Football Focus, at least turnover-worthy play rate. And he also came into this game as the only quarterback with a minimum of 50 dropbacks not to have a sack actually credited to what he did in the pocket. I mean, this is a quarterback who is evading pass rush at the highest level of any quarterback in the NFL right now. You do not have a quarterback who is doing what Geno Smith is better than what he's doing right now. In terms of the grand scheme of quarterback play, give me 4 quarterbacks who are playing better than Geno Smith. You might be able to do that, but you certainly cannot give me 9 other quarterbacks who are playing better than Geno Smith overall. I mean, he is easily a top 10 quarterback, maybe a top 5 quarterback overall. He was just incredible tonight. There were so many plays where Seattle should have been, like you said, Corbin, dead to rights on that play, and Geno Smith managed to find an open receiver. His offensive line is not doing him any favors. The offensive line is among the worst in the league, as we know at this point, and he has found ways to just make plays out of absolutely nothing, and he continued to do that today. And it's, again, what I said earlier, Corbin. Honestly, I firmly believe that he is the best player on this football team. And I don't think that's an overreaction. I don't think that's a hot take. I do think that Geno Smith is the best player that the Seahawks have right now. And I think that he is such an asset in everything that they want to do with this system and that Ryan Grubb is implementing. I think if you put any other quarterback in this system, they are not getting even close to the same results that they are with Geno Smith. So, with that said, extend the man. I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon, but I would love to see Geno Smith be the quarterback of the Seattle Seahawks for 3 to 5 more years at this point, because he is just playing lights out. Overall, I know that you also want to talk about Kenneth Walker. We've talked enough about Geno Smith at this point. Kenneth Walker just had an incredible game. So go ahead and take it away, Corbin.
Yeah, listen, we have got to talk about K9. And look, the first half, Ryan Grubb just came out saying, you know what, I'm not going to run the ball. They only ran the ball with Ken Walker III 4 times in the first half. Geno Smith dropped back to throw 25 times. They clearly had the game plan set up. Hey, we don't think your corners can cover our receivers. And for the most part, they couldn't. The Seahawks had a ton of success throwing the football in this game. But what really got their offense rolling in the second half is when they got Ken Walker III going with the ground game. 3 runs of 20-plus yards in the second half alone. He had a scintillating 21-yard touchdown run. And look, this is the thing that Ken Walker III can do that very few other running backs in the NFL can do. It was a zone run to the left, and then he bangs it back inside and cuts back and then outruns multiple defenders all the way to the sideline. There's very few running backs in the NFL that can do that against NFL athletes on defense. Ken Walker III is that guy that can do that, and he provides that electricity. There were a couple other runs he had. One of his 1-yard touchdowns, it was a between the tackles run. Oh, it's all stuffed up. I'm just going to bounce it outside. And sometimes he gets in trouble doing that, but most of the time he gets away with it because of how explosive and how much juice he has. He also had a nice catch in the first half. He is really a game changer when he's out there because he has a different gear. And Zach Charbonnet, I thought, played really well when he has opportunities today. But at the same time, Zach Charbonnet just doesn't have that gear that Ken Walker III has that can allow you to have a back that can create something out of nothing. And there were a few plays today that he absolutely did that. A couple times ended up backfiring on him, but the Seahawks will live with that when he scores 3 touchdowns in his return from an oblique injury. So Ken Walker III, he deserves plenty of accolades. I think this was the Geno Smith show. And at the same time, 3 touchdowns for Ken Walker, 80 rushing yards in just 12 attempts. He was sensational in the second half. Let's get to our defensive game balls. And look, this was probably the hardest one because the defense generally did not play well at all today. But I know there were a few guys that at least made standout plays that could justify getting a game ball coming out of this game.
Yeah, look, last thing I want to say, Corbin, about Kenneth Walker real quick is just that WWE play was absolutely ridiculous. It literally was, and I'm not exaggerating here, Corbin, it was the weirdest play I've ever seen in an NFL football game. I have never seen a play like that. I don't think we'll ever see a play like that again. Anyways, on to defense. Tyrell Dodson, overall, he showed up, okay? And that's the biggest thing is the fact that he was one of very few defensive starters who actually started this game and finished this game, obviously with Julian Love going out with a thigh injury. That's another storyline that we're going to have to follow here in the next few days, considering the fact that Seattle is now without almost half of its starting defense, heading into week 5, which is not something I want to think about right now. But Tyrell Dodson, 10 tackles, as you see there on the screen if you're watching on YouTube, 1 tackle for loss, 5 solo tackles. But he also had that huge tackle in the fourth quarter to force that punt by Detroit, potentially giving Seattle a chance to go down and tie the game. Unfortunately, they could not, and that led obviously to the offensive pass interference by Tyler Lockett that sort of neutralized that drive overall whenever they went for it on 4th down. But overall, Tyrell Dodson just continuing to show the fact that he is a viable starting linebacker in this league, inside linebacker particularly. I think a lot of fans will be surprised if he's not extended at the end of this season. I think he's shown a lot in that regard, and the fact that he should be the starting linebacker going forward, especially the one calling plays with the green dot on his helmet, Corbin. That's been it's proved fruitful so far. So in Tyrell Dodson's short stint with the Seahawks, and I don't think that they probably are thinking of a better option there at that position because Tyrell Dodson just continues to play really well.
Yeah, I thought that he had a decent game, and obviously it's hard to say anybody played great on this defense because everybody was making mistakes, but Dodson did have that critical tackle for loss. He made a couple other plays against the run. It feels like every week we are at least seeing consistent effort from him. He's a guy that seems to be buying into what the defense is selling. And the communication stuff, when you have that many different teammates that are playing around you, it's that much tougher. Nobody's going to use that as an excuse, but certainly that is an issue. This is a game where you just got to look for guys when your defense gives up 42 points. You got to look for guys that had flash plays. And Derek Hall had maybe the flashiest play by a Seahawk defender today, getting after Jared Goff. And fans were upset here at Ford Field. They were booing and screaming because it looked like a horse collar. But as the officials explained, because Jared Goff was in the pocket, it was not a horse collar penalty. But he looked like he got shot out of a cannon that had – it had gunpowder that was like on steroids. Like, I can't explain how fast he got shot out. But just bam, he's in the backfield and ends up reaching out and grabbing Jared Goff. And the strength you got to be able to have to do that. He's an incredibly powerful dude, reaches out, grabs onto Jared Goff's shoulder pads, and just slams him to the ground. It was an awesome sack, and Derek Hall continues to ascend, and I thought he played a pretty solid game today. The Seahawks were not able to get a lot of pressure on Jared Goff, but he had 3 pressures by my count. I have to go back and watch the film, but he was one of the few players that I consistently saw that was getting in position to make plays. And so for me, Derek Hall's got to be that game ball winner, just because in the day where there were very few highlights on defense, Derek Hall at least had one very notable flash play that stood out. You and I were in agreement. Look, we've been struggling with special teams a couple times in games earlier this year, but look, Jason Myers had 1 field goal attempt, and it was a 62-yarder. He had no chance to make that anyway, but he didn't make a field goal. The kick and punt return teams had more penalties than they did solid returns. Michael Dixon was booting balls into the end zone for touchbacks. He wasn't on. We are not giving a game ball because there was nobody on special teams that did anything.
Get
At
it
least
out of
they
here.
counted. D. Williams had a really nice kick return late in the game, or punt return, but it got called back because of a penalty. So we're not going to give a game ball on special teams. It's our show. We're allowed to make that distinction every week. So, hey, we had to give it to defense somehow. We're not going to do it on special teams. Let's shift gears now, Connor, to our 3 up, 3 down, our weekly stock watch. The players who impressed and those that are going to be looking to bounce back next week against the New York Giants on Sunday afternoon at Lumen Field. And we always have this interesting discussion before we start the show. And this particular one, just because of the discrepancy in how offense and defense played in this game, we really could call this 3 up, 3 down offense versus defense edition, because that in the end is how it's going to look. At least for me, all the players I've got down for 3 up are offensive players, and it's understandable because that's the side of the ball that actually showed up tonight.
Yeah, again, I mean, we're not going to put the game ball guys on here either. So at the end of the day, you've got Jackson Smith and Jigba, who had an incredible game, and I pointed him out on Seahawks on SI, Corbin, as my pick to click, because I really thought that he was going to be in for a big game this week. And in the receiving yards, don't really show that. He only ended up with 51 receiving yards on 8 catches, which only comes out to 6.4 yards per catch, which isn't great. But overall, he really, really was that guy who was the reliable option for Geno Smith, which is what I expected him to be in those short yardage situations, needing to pick up a first down. I really liked how JSN showed up in that regard today. And also, obviously, you got to give kudos to A.J. Barner just for that first career receiving touchdown. I tweeted at the same time, Corbin, that maybe I was a little bit wrong about A.J. Barner. Like in the preseason, in the first couple just appearances I saw from him, I saw nothing spectacular from A.J. Barner. I really wondered whether he was going to be a contributor on this Seahawks team, and guess what? He catches a touchdown pass. So good for A.J. Barner. I think he made a really nice move. Obviously, diving into the end zone there, that was great. And then obviously Zach Charbonnet showed up big as well. So I'm really happy for all these guys. They all played really, really well. Obviously, it wasn't enough to get the win, but all these guys on offense were strong performers today.
Jackson Smith and Jigba, when you look at the stat line, like you said, 6.4 yards per catch, you're like, that's not an impressive game. But how many times did he make clutch catches on 3rd down in this game? He was Geno Smith's go-to guy in those situations. The Seahawks were really effective on 3rd down today, and he would have had that 4th down and 3 conversion if not for the call that they made on Tyler Lockett. I mean, every time that they needed a big play on 3rd or even 4th down, Geno Smith was going to number 11. He was making plays in the short to intermediate passing game. A couple of times he was able to create a little bit of yardage after the catch to pick up those first downs. So I thought he played really well. A.J. Barner, not just the touchdown, he had an 18-yard catch. Unfortunately, I keep going back to the drive that was stalled by Lockett's penalty, but it was earlier on that drive, an 18-yard catch on a very similar bootleg play that Barner scored the touchdown on. He had a couple nice blocks in the run game. It feels like he is carving out a bigger role in this offense as a rookie. By the end of the season, who knows? He might end up being your number 1 tight end because of his blocking ability. if he's able to show that he can catch the ball consistently, which was not something he was asked to do much in college, particularly at Michigan last year, if you can get him contributing more in the passing game, this kid could end up being a really nice mid-round pick for the Seahawks. And Zach Charbonnet, 5 catches, I believe he had 38 or 39 yards. He really provided a spark in the second half in the passing game. That's why they are putting him in those third down roll situations where they can, or 2-minute drill offense, because of his hands out of the backfield, his pass protection ability. He had a 12-yard run. I believe that he had 2 runs for 15 yards. Didn't get a lot of carries in this game, but he looked really good and was providing juice. You see a guy that's getting more confidence as he has more opportunities. So all 3 of those guys I thought played really well. You could make arguments for a number of other players. The offense really played well for most of this football game. On the flip side, from the 3-down standpoint, it almost felt like we could have had 5 or 6 guys on this list on defense, just because it was overall, the entire unit, it was a dismal performance. And listen, Devin Witherspoon was my pick to click, and he had a quarterback hit, but most of this game, it seemed like he was either in trail in coverage, getting beat by somebody, or he was getting blown up by David Montgomery, that 40-yard catch that was like a 5-yard catch to begin with. And I thought Devin Witherspoon was going to come up and hit stick him, and instead he just ended up just getting trucked. David Montgomery shoved him back, just shrugged him off, and then he darts 40 yards going the other direction. Devin Witherspoon has had a lot of plays that have gotten away from him this season. There's certainly been some really nice plays, but I've not seen the kid elevate his game the way that I thought he was going to in year 2. And there may be some learning curves of this new defense that are impacting things, but they need more from number 21. They need him to play like the superstar that he is capable of playing. And right now, you're seeing a guy that is leaving some tackles on the field. There's some plays in coverage that are being left. Some of that might be blown coverages the other guys are having that's making him look bad. I got to go back and look at the tape, but it just boils down to expectations. The fact that missed tackle, that really stood out among a lot of other missed tackles in this football game for a player that you were expecting more from.
It's a really good point, Corbin, because at the end of the day, we expect a lot from Devin Witherspoon as the number 5 overall pick last year. And you watch that 40-yard catch and run by David Montgomery. And we know David Montgomery is a very talented player. He's been up and down in his career, but these last couple seasons, he's been really, really good. And you watch Devin Witherspoon just go hit him, and you watch it in slow motion. And it looks like, what is it, Newton's second law just doesn't exist on that play, Corbin, where the force has an equal and opposite reaction. Like, Devin Witherspoon hits him, and David Montgomery does not flinch. And instead, Devin Witherspoon falls on his butt. And to Witherspoon's credit, I will give him this. Witherspoon chases down the play, and he's one of the last ones there at the end of the play to be able to get there and force him out of bounds. But overall, I also need to go back and just watch it again. But overall, you just didn't feel him that much. And in these games, you expect Devin Witherspoon to show up and be a big factor. And I think we just didn't feel that tonight. Travis Gibson, let's just not drop him in coverage anymore. I think that's probably for the best. He obviously had that big reception that he gave up to Sam Laporta. And then also, I know this was not his assignment. It was not necessarily on Travis Gibson, but he just so happened to be the closest one to the play. But on what may be coined the Detroit special, he noticed that Jared Goff was running out into the flat and towards the end zone before anybody else. And so it sure looked like Travis Gibson was the one who gave up that touchdown catch to Jared Goff. But I'm not necessarily counting that against him overall. Let's just keep him as a pure rusher. But even then, he just wasn't that effective. I think we want, obviously, Uchenna Nwosu, Boye Mafe doing most or getting most of the snaps at those positions rather than Gibson. And one of the last things that I wanted to touch on, obviously, Corbin, is just the defensive tackles, the backup defensive tackles. Just not great in this game. And it's tough because obviously you're down Leonard Williams, you're down Byron Murphy, and those are two of probably the best defensive tackles in the National Football League, even at this point. Byron Murphy has been incredible through his first couple weeks as an NFL football player. Getting pressure both as an interior pass rusher, also just in run stopping. But you put Jonathan Hankins in there, you put Jaron Reed in there, and you back him up with, obviously, along that defensive line, Mike Morris, Miles Adams, some of those other guys that filled in, Quentin Bohanna off the practice squad. And they just could not stop the run, Corbin. They just could not stop the run. Oftentimes, Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery just had massive lanes to run through. And I think at the end of the day, you have to put those guys down because, look, if we're going to go into this game with this decimated of a defensive group, you need guys that are going to step up. And Mike McDonald talks all the time about next man up mentality. Yep. Today, I feel like they did not embody that next man up mentality. And at the end of the day, if you're gonna continue to say that, your guys have to embody it. And I feel like today they didn't.
They got pushed around, plain and simple. And even the starters, Jonathan Hankins and Jaron Reed, who started the game well, it felt like the Lions were imposing their will against those guys. And listen, they're playing more snaps than they probably would like to have these big guys playing, and that's part of it. But I just felt the defensive tackle group as a whole, they didn't rise to the occasion. It was a bad matchup. Detroit, even without Frank Ragnow, is still a really solid offensive line, and they were creating push. The linebackers were getting linemen on them at the second level, and a lot of that had to do with the fact they were not winning at the line of scrimmage. And so, look, there may be games where you could get away with having the players they were missing. In this game, it just didn't work out, and that's not an excuse. Look, those guys got to play better. They got to find a way to work around it, but it wasn't going to happen tonight. They were not able to hold their own against the run. They didn't have much of a pass rushing contribution from those guys that were the second and third stringers playing this game either. So, end of the day, this is what happens in the NFL when you have injuries like that. Guys got to try to step up, but a lot of times there's a reason that you're a second or third string player in the NFL. There is going to be a drop-off in performance, and that negatively impacted the Seahawks on defense today. There is no question about it. As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Connor at C. John Benintendi. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up tomorrow, it's a special edition of Tell the Truth Tuesday. We're going to go back and look at the tape. Rob Rang and I will be diving into observations coming out of the first loss of the season for the Seahawks. Make sure you're listening in. Enjoy the rest of your Monday night or your early Tuesday morning for those of you listening on the East Coast. Go Hawks.